Hey everybody, I wanted to start putting out some more content showing my face and breaking down some of the concepts that are pretty foundational in the way that I program for my athletes and for myself. The first one that I find just super important and that you can get a lot out of is just understanding dynamic movement and the three phases of dynamic movement, the adaptations that take place, and kind of how you can target each phase of that movement and elicit specific adaptations by doing so. So we're going to talk about all this. We're going to start really slow because some of these principles, there's a lot of scientific jargon and it can be very intimidating and overwhelming. So I really am going to do my best to just make it very digestible, give it to you in short kind of bursts, and then give you a foundation so that you can do your own research if it sparks an interest. So we're going to start by just talking about dynamic movement itself. So dynamic movement is active, and it involves taking a muscle or muscles through a partial or complete range of motion. Dynamic movement consists of three distinct phases, which we'll talk about shortly. So pretty much all athletic movements are dynamic in nature, and the first phase of all dynamic movement is going to be the eccentric phase. So the eccentric phase is the decelerating or lowering portion of a movement. During this time, the muscle lengthens, and the external load is greater than the internal force that your body's producing. Prime examples include the descent of a squat or loading up for a vertical jump. So before we get into the adaptations that take place during this phase of the movement, I just want to leave it at that and help you understand the concepts before we get into kind of understanding why it's important. Just know it's important. So next we have the second phase of dynamic movement, which is the isometric phase, commonly referred to as just the pause of a movement. So during an isometric contraction, we have a constant muscle length and joint angle. The external load equals the internal force at this particular junction. So prime examples are the bottom of a squat before initiating the ascent, or just holding an athletic position in anticipation of a ball being hit or a free throw being shot, anything like that. It's pretty universal. So that is the second phase of dynamic movement. Now we have the third and final phase of dynamic movement. This is going to be the concentric phase. So the concentric phase is the ascent or the upward phase of a movement. During this period, a muscle shortens. The internal force is greater than the external force. Some examples are the ascent of a squat, or a bench press, getting up for a dunk, or swinging a baseball bat. So if we look at swinging a baseball bat, just to kind of review, swinging a baseball bat is a prime example of dynamic movement because you have the eccentric portion where you're kind of cocking back, the muscles are lengthening, and then you have a brief pause, and sometimes you might not even be able to actually denote which part of the movement is isometric because it's such a quick transition. We'll talk more about that when we talk about manipulating these different types of contractions to elicit different adaptations. But like I said, we have the eccentric phase where muscles are lengthening. We then have a brief pause before a concentric phase when you're actually swinging the bat, and the muscles are shortening. So to recap, dynamic movement is actively taking muscles through a complete or partial range of motion. And all dynamic movement consists of three phases. We have the eccentric phase, the isometric phase, and the concentric phase. Dynamic movement is prevalent in all sports. All athletic movements are dynamic in nature, so it's very important to understand. From here, we will build on this. We'll talk about adaptations. We'll talk about how you can manipulate these variables in your training or in your athlete's training. That's all I got for you.